want to tell you a little bit about my backstory behind this, because I'm actually from a farming family.
Right.
And my dad was a farmer his entire life from a very young age. And my mum was a farmer's wife. And they had traditional roles.
Uh-huh.
She had the children and looked after the children, and he went out to work and stuff like that. So I grew up on a farm. And he was a dairy farmer mainly, but the dairy aspect of the farming he'd kind of stopped when I was very young.
Right.
So it was really an arable farm, but there were still times when the barns were full of calves, dairy calves, and he had beef cows as well, which obviously as a child, you're taught, it's a fun thing. You go down the barn to feed the cows, and the calves, obviously they're trying to suckle on your fingers, and when you're a kid it's a really fun thing to do, and you know what I mean, you just don't realise the reality of behind those things. We were in a very kind of heavy shooting area, and from a very young age I was exposed to it. My first pocket money actually was earned gutting pheasants when I was it's a really early memory of mine. must have been about 4, 5, something like that. And I would earn £2.50 for every brace that I did. And now I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, it's horrific. I can't believe I did those things when I was so little, and it was just so normal. But I guess when you're involved in the farming community, that's just life. So when I wanted to work with animals then, because I was brought up in this sort of environment. And when I left secondary school, I went to agricultural college and I did animal care, and I worked on farms myself. And when I first went vegan, I looked back on this part of my life and was absolutely horrified, and it was horrible. That once I changed my perspective, and I looked back at the things that I've done that I'm now so against, like the mutilation of animals, which is just an industry standard thing to do now. I've done that and I hate that, but it's given me a good place of knowledge that I can talk about it from, So, yeah, I worked on farms myself, and I also had a job in a breeding kennels. And I also worked in a game butcher's for 5 years, I think it was. Yeah, so I used to go out shooting with the gamekeepers in the evening, and yeah, so that's my backstory. That's what I did in my previous life. Life took me on a completely different path, and I came away from working with animals because I was found some better stuff to do, that didn't involve me getting cold and dirty and, having to get up at 6 a.m. and, all of that stuff. So life sort of directed me away from that. My parents had moved off the farm by this point, so there was literally no connections with that. And I got into tattooing. I won't tell you about that story because that's a completely different one. But I ended up getting into tattooing. I started piercing first. Was friends with a tattooist, and he asked me if I'd like to be his body piercer, and I said yes. And that's how I got into tattooing. And then it wasn't until years down the line, obviously veganism had started getting bigger. And I'll be honest, vegans used to really annoy me because I'd come from that place and I'd grown up in that world and I'd done those things. It had always just been in my head that was just normal. That's how things are. That's how, that's the reality of agriculture, animal agriculture, and that's the way it is. So it was never my intention to be vegan at all. And what happened was I had quite a bad mental health breakdown it was 2014, 2015. It was really awful time in my life and it took a long time to recover. But when I'd started coming out of it, I found myself really connecting with animals on a different level. And I would watch, say, for example, footage of a cow being pushed into a slaughterhouse where they're panicking and distressed and they're really trying to get away. My previous mindset would have thought, well, obviously no one wants to get killed. So, that's just what happens in a slaughterhouse. Everyone tries to get away, that's normal. But when something had happened in my head and I was watching that footage and I was feeling that. I was feeling that on another level. Like I was really feeling the terror and the anxiety and the panic that animal was going through. And I'd never felt that before. Even though I'd always been compassionate towards animals, I'd never felt it in my body like that, yeah. And it just really started me questioning, as an animal lover, can I really call myself an animal lover whilst I am actively contributing towards those animals being pushed into this place and feeling that way? And so, that was my first initial kind of seeds in my brain thinking about it, And there was then a very sort of like a succession of things that happened to me after that. So one of my friends had gone to China and she'd never, ever even indicated she was, against eating animals or anything like that. She came back from China and she said, I'm going to go veggie for a year because in China, culturally, they're massively different to us and they eat all of the animals, the ones that we class as domesticated that, the average person would never even dream of eating. And she couldn't decide how she drew her line about which animals she would eat and which she wouldn't and why she had that line and where it was. And she just started questioning it. And once she said that to me, I was like, that's a really good question. Where is your line and how do you draw it as an animal lover? There should be no line, really. If you're going to consume animals, you either consume them all or you don't consume any, because it made me really think about my perception and how I view these animals and why I deem it okay to eat one and not another. Because really, they're just unfortunate enough to be born into different bodies, and that is it. So I was thinking to myself, wow, that's actually blowing my mind. And then I just thought, I can't eat any of them because, why is it okay for me to go, well, I'm going to love this animal, but that one can go and have its throat cut open so I can consume their flesh? Because we're in a very privileged society in England and we've got an abundance of foods at our fingertips 24 hours a day. Why do we have to eat animals? We don't have to eat them. So if we can cause the least suffering possible in our diet, which is the quickest and easiest thing you can change, then why are we not doing that? So, all of this had been going through my head and I'd been thinking, I'm going to go vegetarian, but, oh God, I'm basically going to die if I don't have animals. And one night, I had a light bulb moment, even though I'd been thinking about all of this for a while. I was lost in the YouTube black hole and I was watching just random videos, and Dairy is Scary popped up by Erin Janus. And I watched it, and it's like 5 minutes, 48 seconds long, if I remember correctly. And even though she didn't teach me anything I didn't know about the dairy industry, just where my perspective on this had changed mentally, and I watched it, it was like something went off in my head. And I just thought, oh my God, I can never, ever contribute to this ever again. Like, it's horrific. The dairy industry is horrific. And I'd been part of that at times and not even seen the reality of it, you know, because I've been indoctrinated into that mindset where all of this stuff was just normal to do to these animals. And I watched that short documentary, and I was like, I am never, ever, ever giving my money to that industry ever again, ever. And as the evening went on, I was watching other stuff, and then I just decided that the next day was going to be the last day I ever consumed meat or dairy. Veganism was never in my head at all. I just decided I was making a stand because I didn't agree with it. So the following day, I was actually so disgusted with myself that I'd gone for so long and contributing to this and not realising what I was contributing to exactly. I did not even want to eat those products. Like, I didn't want to go out and get all the things that I really enjoyed so that I could literally have them for one last time at all. I was so disgusted with those products, and all of a sudden I just saw them as products of abuse to animals. And that was it. I tell you what the last meat product I ate was, and I did it just out of, I don't know what you would call it. So there's a burger shop in Newbury that I used to go to when I was younger. It was like a weekly ritual. Me and all my mates used to go and hang out there, and we'd get our burgers and, you know, sit out in the car park and stuff like that. And I was like, for old time's sake, what do I want my last animal product to be? And I went to that burger bar and I got a burger and I ate it in my car. And that was it. I don't even remember sitting there and thinking to myself, oh, that was really nice. I can't really remember how I felt, but I wasn't upset that it was going to be the last time I ever had that. So yeah, I kind of just instantly cut out dairy and meat products from my diet. And it was actually quite difficult because we're going back to 2017 now. And in 2017, options were very, very limited. And I remember you could get Linda McCartney sausages, 2 different flavours, and Tesco's did soya mince. And obviously you could still get your tofu blocks and stuff like that. But in terms of like, if you wanted to sub a meat into your diet, that was it. Oh, I think there were some burgers as well. It was like so limited. So I kind of just switched myself over to meat subs whilst I was dipping my toes in the water of how I'm going to feed myself. But I still had chickens, and I was still eating their eggs because veganism hadn't even entered into my mind because vegans were just really annoying. And so I still had my chickens. So I was still eating chicken eggs. And as a few weeks went on and I was really changing my perspective on so much, it all came in really fast. I was cooking up my eggs one morning and I was looking at them and I was just thinking, what are these? What are these? They're a waste product of a bird's reproductive cycle. They're a load of goo that she's made, and it's biologically designed to grow into veins, feathers, beak, feet, toes. Do you know what I mean? And I just thought, this isn't a food. Who taught me this was a food? Like, who told me that? And then that was it. I never ate eggs again. And then I realised that I was one of those bloody annoying vegans and I had to tell everyone about it, because surely if everyone else saw what I saw, they would care. And then I went on this rampage there where I was just, you know, and I know a lot of vegans go through these waves of how they deal with it, how they project it, how they talk to people about veganism and stuff. But yeah, I was one of those really, really annoying vegans because I was just talking about it the whole time because I was just desperate for other people to see what I saw. And it's very difficult because it makes you realise how many people don't care. Or not that they don't care, they'd rather turn a blind eye. Even if one of their best friends is saying, look at this footage, this is terrible, this is awful. these pigs are literally eating themselves alive or eating each other alive. People just go, oh yeah. You know, it's difficult, isn't it?
100%.
So yeah, I lost quite a lot of friends quite quickly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, my journey through veganism has brought me lots of really, really good ones. I've made a lot of new friends. So yeah, that was my journey into veganism, and I didn't know any other vegans. I didn't have a support network. It was really hard because you didn't have the information that you have now on your phones, online. And I can remember my first few shops, well, probably for a good 2 or 3 months, actually, I spent a lot of time on my phone in the supermarket because I was going through all the ingredients and I was trying to figure out what was vegan, what wasn't, because a lot of stuff wasn't even labelled vegetarian then.
Yeah.
And you literally had to go through the list of ingredients and figure it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it took a while to relearn all these old beliefs and reprogram my brain. So yeah, and then that obviously then led me into activism because I really wanted to find a peer group of other people that had the same beliefs as me, because I didn't have anyone else. So I found a march in London to go to, and it was the Animals Are Sentient Beings March. And so I went off up there with my friend. She had kind of started going vegan as well, but she wasn't as passionate about it, let's put it that way. But she came with me and we went to this march, and I instantly made some friends, which I've still got now, which is amazing. And yeah, so yeah, then I started protesting. So we went to Canada Goose that day as well, because Canada Goose hadn't been open for that long. And everyone who was at the march then went to Canada Goose and literally caused absolute hell for them. It was great. It was such a good day. So let me just have a drink. Yeah, that's really what led me into activism then. And I would go to London quite a lot, wave banners, you know, do all these things, go on the marches and stuff like that. But then even that, I got to the point where I was like, am I using my time effectively here? Like, yes, we 100% need people that are going to do that form of protest and activism, but I just felt like, for me personally, it wasn't the most productive way I could spend my time, which then led me down other avenues. What other activism can I do? So I started getting involved in slaughterhouse vigils. So important. They're so important to do. And especially if you're a non-vegan and you're coming into veganism and you still have a platform of non-vegans, and you still have a platform of non-vegans that you can share stuff with, because not so much now. I still do have non-vegans on my social media, but sometimes it's a bit like an echo chamber where I'm this far down the line. You're almost preaching to the converted. So I think a good time to try and help others realise is when you first go vegan, because especially if you've still got a large amount of non-vegans around you that have never been exposed to a vegan, going, look, this is what is happening. The slaughterhouse vigils, I find, really help people connect with the animals going into the abattoirs, slaughterhouses, death holes. Because most people will have never ever seen that or experienced that, because obviously we're taught from such a young age to, there's this grey area. You look after this bird that's fallen out of the nest, but then you also eat chicken drumsticks for your dinner. Like, we're taught from a very young age to have this cognitive, this disconnect. And I think showing people slaughterhouse footage makes people remember they are animals and they were alive and they've had a journey to that place where they've then been murdered and turned into a nice little product in a packet with no blood or hair or fur or eyes to look at, or anything like that. It's made so easy for people just to turn a blind eye and ignore that. You open the packet, you don't even have to touch the product. So I think vigils are very important to show people the reality.
Looking back, it's an incredible journey and really fascinating, having come from the background you came from, got to where you are, and I'm really intrigued as to why, looking back, how do you piece together the kind of why around that you went straight into activism quite quickly? So I think about many folks' journey, and that's probably not so common these days. I'd say probably even more so, because there's more kind of like, don't really necessarily try, the phrase doesn't really sit well with me, but the kind of almost lifestyle veganism, there's a lot of folks who come to it for all kinds of different reasons now, and maybe not, animals is probably not their first reason. In so many cases, they might get there, but it's not usually. I don't even say usually, but it's often not anyway. And so therefore they're not naturally drawn to activism, because perhaps the people that brought them into veganism weren't activists themselves. They were health influencers, or they were environmentalists, or you name it. There's a whole variety of ways in. So looking back, why do you think it was so? I mean, you mentioned obviously there's the social group and the kind of the need to find a community. I totally relate to that kind of idea. But it's really interesting that it must have been more than that, because if it was just that, you would have been happy at the protests. But you said there was this kind of like almost this kind of itch of like, how could I be more effective?
Yeah, absolutely.
So looking back, why do you think that is?
So I think a large part of it was that I really started to see these animals trapped in these facilities as being massively oppressed and enslaved. And I'd never seen that from that perspective before. And I started to see them as victims. And they're the victims of society that no one really sees as a victim at all. But if they found an animal in some of the conditions that these animals are living in, and bodily wise having inflicted on them, there would be outrage, there would be outrage. But because they're hidden away and they're also food, people don't see them as a victim at all. But actually it's awful. The suffering they're going through is terrible. Like, they're massive victims of our society and our actions. And I think once you see them as victims and you realise the millions of animals that are victims of the food industry and are having this inflicted on them with no choice and living in absolute misery their entire existence, some of them aren't even seeing daylight, not getting to carry out their natural behaviours that they would and should be allowed to. I really just felt like the reason I wanted to do more was because I wanted to stand up for them, and I wanted to be a voice, and I wanted to say to people like, this is what's going on, please pay attention. And yeah, I think that's why it was for me, that I just threw myself into it, because my perception changed so quickly. And I had these realizations, and then I was like, oh my God, this is horrific. Absolutely horrific. But it's really difficult as well, because all of a sudden I felt like I'd left this cult, because everyone gets indoctrinated into this cult of consumerism, where you're consuming these products but also calling yourselves an animal lover. And most people genuinely are animal lovers, and if they actually did take a step back and look at the reality, I think a lot of people would actually opt out, but that causes a lot of frustration, I know, with activists, and not just me, with the whole vegan community who are sort of actively trying to help other people see this. So yeah, once you understand that there's billions of victims trapped in an oppressive system of slavery, I just really, really wanted to do everything I could to help. Yeah. And that is then why I ended up going into direct action, because again, it's really good going to slaughterhouses and doing other forms of activism. But the reality is, I know very few situations where animals have been saved from going into a slaughterhouse in the UK. Yes, we'd all love to be able to save those animals and take them and put them in a safe place. But the reality is, in the United Kingdom, these people ain't giving up those animals easily. You know, they want their money. Those animals have been taken there to sell or to, you know, get back butchered so that they can now sell it from their farm shop or whatever. They ain't going to give you an animal just because you've asked them to, you know. They don't care. So I then started thinking to myself, how can I make more of an impact? And I started getting involved in like farm intrusions and things like that, which is horrible, but you've got to do it. It's horrible being in those environments, like very, very triggering. That was actually what really made me start to get to the point where I couldn't be around people eating animals or animal products. And I'd kind of not really made much of a stand about that. I would just have walked away from those situations. But actually, when you're sat in a farm for 12 hours and you're hearing it, smelling it, experiencing it, to then see people viewing those animals as a food source and eating them, I just can't even be around it now. I can't be around it. I can't sit at a table with people eating those products. And I remove myself so far from those situations because it really triggers you back to those situations. So yeah, I started doing farm intrusions. And we did do one where we occupied a egg-laying facility, and we did liberate 50 hens from there, which was always makes me feel really emotional. Sorry. Yeah, it always makes me feel really emotional. Because I think even though we couldn't get the other 31,000, however many out of there, we made such a massive change to those 50. And it always really, really sticks with me, because walking out of that facility after being in there for so long and actually getting to take someone out was just such a huge moment for me, and I know for everyone else that was involved, because it rarely happens in the UK. Yeah. The farm intrusions, those farmers don't give you their animals, you know, they just want you out of there. So to negotiate 50 hens out of that was a pretty big thing at the time. And they also got their RSPCA approval removed. It was quite big. It was all over the news, but I won't go down that rabbit hole of the RSPCA. Yeah. But you know, they did an inspection, gave them advisories, and had their approval back, I think, a week later, which was devastating. But I know a lot of activists that managed to go and get those eggs taken off the shelves, because when they didn't have that RSPCA approval, those boxes were false advertising. So there was like this big mission then. Everyone was going into the supermarkets, taking all those eggs from that particular farm, taking them to customer service and saying, this isn't true, this is false advertising. So it had an impact, you know, even though it was for a short one, and it raised awareness in the local community, because a lot of people locally didn't realise what was going on in that farm, and we got a lot of good footage out of there. It was horrific. There was some horrific stuff in that farm. So so I would encourage anyone to get involved in that sort of thing. At the moment, it's slowed down a bit. No one's really organising a lot, I think, since we've come out of, you know, the lockdowns and stuff like that. But they're really important to do, I think, definitely, especially if you've never stepped foot on a farm or, you know, gone into one of these facilities.
You mentioned about that, you know, for the farmer, they're ultimately going to get their money. And you mentioned, you know, when you're at a slaughterhouse and you're at a vigil, very, very rarely is anything stopped. The machine of animal agriculture is very rarely stopped at all, or even halted in its progress.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of what occurs to me, I suppose, is you not only putting yourself in these kind of situations of like, I need to speak up, but then putting yourself on what currently we may see as we're in the morally in the right, but legally we're in the wrong. Yeah. How was that kind of step into that sort of world for you? Because I'd imagine that comes with a whole set of other ramifications for you and potential considerations when you're deciding to take those kind of actions. Is that okay? So I'm now in the eyes of the world. Yeah, I'm doing something illegal. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, illegal but morally correct. Yeah, it's tough. This really shows the importance of doing things in large numbers, because the farm occupations that I went to were large numbers of people. So we're talking like 90 upwards.
Right.
So if you've got that amount of people that have been intruded on a farm and that are holding space there until the negotiations are made and agreed on, and, you know, whatever, you've got all your footage and stuff like that. I mean, what police force can arrest 90 plus activists who are all covered in pig shit? Do you know what I mean? It's a pretty safe thing to do when you're in such large numbers, because you're committing aggravated trespass and you're stopping people from going around their daily business. But I do want to add on that, we've never ever stopped anyone from feeding or doing their, you know, we've never ever done that. And actually the farmers, one farm, we were in a barn and he literally turned all the water off. So the pigs couldn't even drink, you know, and it's not like we were trying to get water out of the taps for ourselves, you know, we all had bottles of water, but he turned off, there was this awful rickety old fan as well, which was moving the air, turned that off, turned all the lights off, locked us in. So his welfare mindset wasn't for his pigs at all. Like, he was like, right, I'm just going to do this because it will really annoy the activist type thing, you know, we never, ever, ever stop people from caring for the animals at all. So as much as we're in there causing havoc for the farmers and as much disruption as possible, we don't deny them of their, you know, daily, what they've got to do to care for those animals. I don't think I've ever done a farm intrusion yet where anyone actually got arrested. And there have been farm intrusions before. The police have just come, because obviously the farmer calls the police straight away. I want to use the term farmer very loosely for these facilities, because they're intensive rearing facilities and breeding facilities. I wouldn't call those people farmers at all. So I recall there being one where the police turned up, literally came and stuck their nose in the door and left. And that was it. They weren't even bothered. They just left everyone to get on with it for the day. But the idea is with these things, you get your local media involved and do you know what I mean? You try and blow it up as much as you can.
And I guess once you've done that, in the sort of court of public perception, you're probably on the right side. Yeah. Because like you said earlier, most people, when they're confronted with this imagery, even if it's short-lived, they can't really disagree with it, you know. Absolutely. They go, okay, that's horrible, that shouldn't be happening. Yeah. And then I think the industry then sort of turns around and says, well, that's a one-off. It's not usually like that. It's usually like you see it on the side of the van with the field and the meadow and everything's beautiful. Yeah, they die of natural causes. And
advertising is just absolute.
But for that moment, when it comes to the sort of court of public opinion, you're... So I guess that's a crucial part of the tactics is get coverage out there, get footage out.
Well, that's the whole reason you do it. Yeah. That's the whole reason you do it, to expose these industries and these farms. You know, I went to one that had all the labels, everything that would make you feel like you're making the most ethical choice if you're a consumer of pigs. Outdoor reared, RSPCA approved, red tractor assured, all of the labels. But we were literally walking through pig sewage up to our knees. Outdoor reared, it's not how people think it is. These pigs aren't out in fields. They were in brick-built sties, and when they were outside in their tiny little bit of outdoor area, they're up to their knees in shit. They've got no bed in. They're sleeping on cold, hard floors. Like, people have these images in their head based on all these labels and this advertising and the television adverts and the photos and all of the stuff that these people push on people to make them think, oh, yeah, making really good choices, you know. I think within I don't want to talk too much about liberation and stuff that the public would deem very illegal behaviour. Yeah. But there's a few cases going through court and have been going through court for the last few months that are quite big cases, mainly surrounding quite effective protests that have been done outside, where people have barricaded and done lock-ons, and these sort of things are generally done in smaller groups, and anyone who goes down that route probably knows they're going to get arrested because of it. So that's something, if you're going to do things in smaller groups and you're going to take that next step, right, and you're going to actually chain yourself to things to stop, you know, slaughterhouses working, then, yeah, there's a higher chance of you being arrested. But there are a few cases that have gone through this year that have been very big cases. I'm not going to name them because people can have a Google and figure them out themselves. Yeah. Where they've been thrown out. And these activists have caused financial loss for hundreds of thousands of pounds because they've shut these places down for however long. And actually, in a court of law, faced with the truth and the reality, the justice system is actually, or, you know, whatever judge is working that day is actually going, well, fair play. Well, maybe not fair play, yeah, but, you know, they're throwing it out because when they're placed with the evidence in front of them, I don't think anyone can really actually say, you've done the wrong thing there. You know, most people would look at what they've done and gone, well, actually, fair play for doing that, because if you hadn't done that, this wouldn't have been shared, this wouldn't have been outed. You know, there's one slaughterhouse that's been prosecuted so many times for its animal, the treatment of animals. And that was quite a big case that got put through court this year, and I believe it all got thrown out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it, in your experience, has it ever gone the other way where almost that there's a counter case off the back of it, that what's been exposed by the activists has been illegal the other way, as in like the behaviours of the farm have been seen to be illegal? Or is that kind of wishful thinking from a point of view of, well, actually the standard, the expected standard is so low, and we're in the world of RSPCA advisories and so on, that it's pretty difficult for them to be doing something illegal?
I think a lot of slaughterhouses do not necessarily illegal stuff, but I think they breach slaughterhouse regulations a lot. A lot. There's several slaughterhouses that I know the names of that you could Google, and they've been caught breaching their regulations, but I don't think it's taken seriously enough.
Right.
And if you actually, I mean, a quick Google can tell you the answer to this. In the last couple of years, actually, how many prosecutions there have been. There have actually been quite a lot, but it makes you realise how many more there is that aren't being taken seriously or picked up on, or, you know, but it's a very corrupt system.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say. It's a very corrupt system. Even down to, you know, I can think of one instance I was told about by someone where they'd actually done a lock-on in front of the slaughterhouse doors, and it was two women. The sexual harassment they went through from the slaughterhouse workers was disgraceful, and the police did not do a single thing about it. They didn't do anything about it. Wow. So it's all really corrupt. Like,
so there's almost, from the law's perspective, how to put this, but there's kind of an element of, from both sides, we're just not really very interested in either of it, or either side. What's being done. Just kind of what we want you to do is disperse and stop doing it. Basically,
yeah. Well, I mean, the police are supposed to remain impartial, aren't they?
Just leave each other alone, kind of thing. But there's not really a enforcing of law, almost as if like you've entered into some sort of agreement by doing this kind of protest.
Yeah.
You're fair game for whatever happens.
Pretty much. Yeah, I do believe that's kind of the general vibe that, from my personal experience, definitely. Especially with the vigils as well. There's a few vigils where activists have tried to slow down the lorries so they can take footage of the animals as they're coming in. And there is one very, very tragic death that was caused, not in England, where an activist got swept underneath a lorry and dragged along. And you run the same risk anywhere in the world if you're going to try and slow vehicles down. And there was a time when, and I don't believe they've started them back up again, but you know, we export live animals. There's only one port left in England where live animals are exported from, and that's Ramsgate. It's Ramsgate, isn't it? Yeah. And there's not a lot of shipments that go out of it. I don't want to call them shipments, but lorries. There's not a lot that go out, or that were going out. So when they were going out, the protests were big. And I know that a couple of people got injured by vehicles then. And I got told by someone else, the police made it very clear to anyone trying to stop those lorries, if you get killed because of that, and you get swept along or you get caught by a lorry or anything like that and you die, it will be put down as a suicide because you've intentionally chosen to put yourself in front of that vehicle. Jeez. Which is awful. In a court, I'm not sure what would happen. I'm going from third-party information.
Sure.
Yeah. But I know that I've been at vigils where certain people have literally been hit by lorries at very slow speed, but if they'd have gone under that lorry, they would have easily died, easily. And the police just stand there and do nothing. They don't care. Because I guess, like you say, you're choosing to put yourself in that situation. So you're choosing to put yourself at risk. Even though that driver of that vehicle should stop, they just don't really take it that seriously. I don't think at any vigils I've been to where the police have actually stopped and spoken to any drivers of vehicles that have put activists in danger, you know. So, yeah, can be quite risky, definitely. But I find it's, if you go out hunt sabbing, that's even worse because there's violence and, a lot of aggression and stuff like that. And the police still do this, we're going to remain impartial type thing, you'll see them having a laugh and a joke and a chat with the hunt half an hour after they've just ripped an animal to shreds.
Yeah, so thinking about the kind of the sabbing, I suppose the variation or the slight difference, which actually I think would stand in I would have thought would stand in the favour of the saboteurs over the hunt versus, say, action on a farm is there's often, I was going to say very clear evidence, I would say very clear evidence in my view from what I've seen, very clear evidence that there has been an illegal activity on the part of the hunt.
Yeah.
And so my naive expectation would be the law therefore isn't so impartial because there's a clear act that has, digressed over the bounds of legal.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not the case, is the sort of a question more than my sort of, from your perspective and the things that you know.
Yeah.
Is that not necessarily the case? They still remain impartial, even if they kind of know something illegal's happened.
I believe so. I believe so. Because a lot of, like you say, you can have so much footage of these things going on and the police, faced with it, won't do anything about it. And it's very frustrating. And I think you're starting to see more prosecutions now, I think, because the awareness of this has been raised so much over the last couple of years, obviously with the webinar that got leaked, which was great. Great. Whoever got into that webinar needs a medal. So, yeah, I think... I'm not sure. I'm not too sure personally why this footage is not permissible and cannot be used as effectively as you would think the justice system would use it. I'm not too clued up about that, if I'm honest.
So that's a completely naive point on my part. So body cam footage and GoPros and drones and all sorts of different bits and pieces not necessarily can be used.
No.
I know that's probably a very naive question.
No, not at all. But I don't know enough about it to be able to sort of pass comment on what makes it submissible to, the police or the court or something like that. I think a lot of the time the police just want this situation to go away.
It's the same kind of mentality as we talked about before. So ultimately, leave each other alone, let them get on with what they want to do. We can't really be bothered to deal with it if it's illegal anyway, because it's it wasn't illegal and it's done by people who have, got influence and so on and so forth.
They said they're out trail hunting.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's perfectly legal. They're allowed to trail hunt, and it's just a very unlucky coincidence. They accidentally killed a fox, or they accidentally killed a hare, or their dogs accidentally chased a deer onto the main road. Do you know what I mean? It's about proving it, isn't it?
They've supposedly laid a trail across train tracks, which I've seen so much footage of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or somebody's cat has been killed by the hounds, because they were in a residential area. Or why were you?
Yeah,
absolutely. You're either incredibly bad at laying a trail, or that wasn't what you were doing.
Yeah,
it's amazing to me that this stuff it's not just as cut and dried as.
I mean, I believe that there's very little evidence of trail laying that's ever been gathered. They might have a little rag they wave around in front of the Sabs' faces to go, look, this is what we used. Yeah. But in terms of like footage actually being gathered of those trails or anyone doing anything like that, I believe there's not a lot out there.
Yeah. And I guess then again, you're dealing with then the court of public opinion, and that's kind of almost where the not the only, but almost the greater damage to the hunt or to the animal agriculture industry can be done.
Totally.
Is in the public's mindset.
Yeah.
Because that, I suppose, then in turn is more likely to shift politicians and so on and so forth, because there's a groundswell of opinion from non-vegan folks that actually, why is this still going on? We thought this was finished years ago.
Yeah. And it's amazing how many people, I mean, if talking about hunting, still actually believe that hunting doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that there are hunts out there who are, they're called clean boot hunts, and they are genuinely trail hunting. But the percentage of those hunts compared to the hunts who are going out under the guise of trail hunting and actually just going out to kill is very small, very, very, very small. You could probably list the clean boot hunts on two hands, maybe.
And the hunts know them, I take it, and they kind of leave them alone because they know what they're doing.
Sabs.
Sorry, the subsets.
Yeah. Generally,
they know which ones are the clean boot hunts.
Yeah, because there's such a small amount of them.
Yeah.
Generally, they get left alone because they are actually legitimately trail just hunting, drag hunting,
ride through the countryside and do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, they're just literally going out, riding their horses, taking the dogs out and chasing a scent. And there are hunts like that. There are. But like I said, it's very minimal. Yeah, the rest are, if they're laying scents out, why are they not videoing themselves doing it and putting it out on their socials and going, we're out laying this morning's trail, or, same as slaughterhouses, isn't it?
Yeah.
If they were so great inside, why are they not putting footage out saying, look, this is what we do? And this is, this is how kind we are to the animals.
Yeah.
So
thinking about the direct action route that you've kind of taken, and it's all what I'm picking up is like a real sense of like logic. Like it's logical for A plus B equals C kind of thing. That you saw that early on in your kind of vegan journey, and then you see it logically speaking into like, well, what can I do? Because I don't agree with that. It's an injustice and it needs to stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so therefore it would be, the A plus the B equals the C, and the C being, I am therefore going to get involved. Why would I not?
Yeah,
almost.
Absolutely.
Do you think that that's becoming increasingly sort of uncommon in the sort of growth of veganism? And what's your feelings on that? Because I flip-flop on this, and I can't ever profess to say that I'm anywhere near direct action at all. I'm incredibly anxious about any sort of form of confrontation and really struggle with the concept. It's probably why I'm more comfortable doing a podcast. And I have a huge admiration for people who can do that and do it regularly, and whether it be saboteurs, folks involved in saves.
Oh, same. Yeah, absolutely.
I just have incredible respect for those people.
Yeah, me too.
For me, it's really living living your values.
Yeah.
But I also, and so I flip-flop, because I have this idea that I sort of definitely hold those people up to a very high sort of, I have a high opinion of those folks. But I also kind of always think, well, people are on a different journey at different points, and actually, even if all they do is food, and then eventually they get to their clothing and their cosmetics and so on and so forth, that's something. And it's, you know, but I flip-flop between that and kind of like, well, we should all be doing more than we are, you know. I just want to get your perspective on it. I know that's more of a ramble than a question, but
no, not at all. I think it's very good points and questions. I think it very much depends on the individual, and like you say, you know, whether they can cope with that mentally or not, because I know vegans that can't even watch graphic footage because it really upsets them. So for someone like that to then expose themselves to a slaughterhouse or a farm, or it would just make no sense, because as activists, we all need to be in the best place possible, and it can really fuck your mental health, like massively. I've been through parts in my time where it's really screwed me over, and I've had massive burnouts, because the more you focus on it, the more you focus on it. So the more you're thinking about it and giving your time to doing activism, especially the extreme stuff where you're exposing yourselves to animals that are really suffering, the more it plays on your mind, and it can take you to some very dark places indeed. And I don't think everyone is cut out for that at all. I know a lot of people who have gone into like quite extreme activism, and then it's really destroyed their mental health, and they've had to come out of it, because when we're not healthy, we can't help the animals.
Yeah.
So as much as we want to do everything we can, you have to really sometimes go, right, actually, is this doing me good at this point in my life? Because actually it's really destroying me. And if you've got a very unhealthy mind because of what you're exposing yourself to, you're not going to be able to do much good with that in terms of helping the animals. So you have to take a step back, and you have to get better, and you have to decide whether that's right for you to go back into that or not, I think. But yeah, I don't think everyone's got that mental capacity to go and expose themselves to those sort of things, like, at all. I think that anyone can be an activist, like anyone, even just talking to someone in the supermarket queue about veganism, or, you know, showing someone a vegan alternative. I would class that as activism. So even if you just are at the end of the spectrum where your kind of main focus about veganism is food, you can still be an activist, definitely. And I think actually that's an interesting point I just wanted to make. Like, you've got a very big spectrum in the world of veganism, and you've got at one end people who just switch up their diet and believe that changing their diet is the most they can do to help animals. And that's then slides right through to the other aspect, the other end of animal rights, is where the people that are going onto the farms who actually don't really think about their food that much, because it's not just about food, it's much deeper than that. It's about animal rights. So wherever you sit out on that spectrum, whether it's just the food end, you can still be an activist. You can still take some chalk out and go and write on the pavement in your local park, or put a sticker on a supermarket shelf or a lamppost, or, you know, activism doesn't have to be about confrontation and exposing yourself to these situations. You can do very gentle forms of activism, just enough to plant seeds in other people's mind, because You don't know when the next person might walk past that lamppost and look at that sticker, and that'll plant a little seed in their head.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then that seed gets watered over time, and then you just don't know. And I think, as well, I got quite frustrated as well with activism and outreach. It's never really been my strong point, but it's really hard because you feel like people don't really take much notice of what you're saying. But then you have to keep in mind that you don't know when the next person's going to talk to them, and the next person, and water that seed and water that seed and water that seed. And I know, I just want to say, if anyone's listening to this, if you are trying to do outreach and you find that you're just hitting walls with people, don't give up and don't let it put you off, because you never know when their seed's going to get watered next time. So it's never, ever wasted. I don't think any form of activism is ever really wasted that much at all.
100%. Steph, look, it's been great chatting with you.
Thank you so much.
I absolutely want to get you back on to talk about tattooing, though.
We've run out of time. I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to come back and talk about the tattoo studio.
Because I've got a ton of questions about that. And that was one of those kind of worlds where I didn't know about the tattoos could be not vegan until I found out about it.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to come back.
Get into that. So if that's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd really like that.
For the moment, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed being here and having this chat. Yeah, it's really good to talk about it.